Prices go up, what happens to yields?
They
Okay,
go.
thank you.
Anthony, you're so mean.
No, I'm kidding.
You need to give a Jeopardy time on that.
What do you think?
They go sideways.
Yeah, down.
It was my next guess.
Yeah. Anyway. All right, you want to roll? Want to just do it? Should we just do it? We got some time
We're
here.
not expecting anybody else? No more
No.
casts of thousands?
I don't think Sophie's attending this one. I think she's
No.
reporting.
Yeah, she's in the work. Yeah, and Nigel is out of town
Oh,
for a family event. So
well, good for him.
Yeah,
I hope it's
so-
something good. No.
No.
There's nothing. It's not terrible. Okay, so let's see here. Intros. Should we just start? We can always edit. Okay, we are here for the Willamette Week endorsement interview for State Treasurer on the Democratic side. We have with us Senator Steiner and Jeff Goodman. You're both running, and that's it today. I'm going to ask each of you to give me about a 5-minute intro. Tell me why you're qualified for this job and why you want to do it. Let's start with you, Senator Steiner.
Sure. So yes, I'm Elizabeth Steiner. I have been in the state legislature now for a little over 12 years. I'm a family physician by profession. I'm a working mom of 3 adult children. And I am somebody who went into the legislature to help Oregon be the healthiest state in the nation. What I know as a family physician is that upstream interventions help people live stronger, healthier, happier lives. And I'm running for treasurer for exactly the same reason. The leading cause of poor health is financial insecurity. The treasurer plays a critical role in many Oregonians' lives in helping them come out of financial insecurity or avoid it in the first place. And whether that's through investing the Public Employee Retirement Fund well and ensuring that public employees' retirements are protected, or encouraging more families to invest in 529 or what are currently called college savings plans for their children to help ensure that they have the best chance at a post-secondary, post-high school education, or Oregon Saves, which is the retirement plan for people whose employer doesn't offer an employer-based retirement plan, or many other options. The treasurer plays a critical role in ensuring that all those programs run well, ensuring that Oregonians across the entire state are educated about them, and that they're easy to enroll in, they're easy to evaluate, and that people can really see how their money is growing and saving. The last piece of it is financial literacy. The vast majority of people have absolutely no financial literacy education. They are not aware of the small things that they can do to create a more secure financial future for themselves and their families and their children. We have an obligation to help educate people, to empower them, to help them save easily. A significant percentage of people are unbanked, which means they have no easy way to save for those inevitable emergencies, like an emergency car repair, that can completely derail a family if they don't have access to even $500 in emergency savings. So as treasurer, my job is first and foremost to grow our pension fund while still investing it according to Oregon values. It's to make sure that we use our bonding capacity to the maximum potential and issue those bonds in the most cost-effective ways so that we get the most bang for our buck. And it's to help Oregonians save through a variety of programs for themselves and their children's future, to help move more families in solidly into the middle class through education, through avoiding emergency cash flow problems, all of those things. It's to empower people and help them be financially self-sufficient.
Great. Big fan of the 529 plan. Power user.
Awesome. That's awesome. That's great. It's one of those things people don't even realize, that little tiny amounts invested up front grow dramatically.
Yeah, start when your kid's born.
Yeah, exactly.
Jeff,
Yes, sir.
5 minutes on why you're qualified and why you want to do this job.
Certainly. I'm a second-generation Oregonian. Grew up here, had the opportunity to get an education with a BA in economics out of Pomona College, one of the Claremont colleges in Southern California. Went on and got my MBA from the Wharton School. Then I had the opportunity to get work and go to work anywhere in the country. And I chose to return to Oregon because it's a state that I love. It's also, I wanted to have the opportunity for an adult relationship with my parents, and I had that for 25 years, which I would not have traded for anything. In my working life, I've worked as an analyst for a Fortune 500 company, the Hyster Corporation, worked as the controller in a startup company, worked as treasurer for other companies after that, one of which was called Biogas Technology. This is 30 years ago. We were ahead of our time because we had a process whereby the decomposition of garbage generates methane and carbon dioxide. We separated those gases out, cleaned it up, added the odorant, and put it in the pipeline for natural gas. So I was the treasurer for that organization. Then I went on and have had the last 30 plus years investing strictly on my own. I've been involved in any number of nonprofit organizations, generally either as the chair, the vice chair, or you'll find this remarkable, the treasurer. Currently I'm serving as the treasurer of Clackamas Volunteers in Medicine. We've recently changed our name to the Clackamas Free Clinic. I'm serving on the vice chair at Mary's Woods. Been a long-time member of the board of Oregon Swimming. Also served as the treasurer of USA Swimming, where I served there for 12 years. In addition to the fact, while I was in college, I was an All-American swimmer, member of the All-American relay team. And have come back and stayed engaged in a variety of areas like that. Also currently I did have 8 years of service on the Lake Oswego City Council, where my focus was on infrastructure, and did I mention infrastructure? And two of the things I was the most proud of when I was serving there was we were able to rebuild the operations and maintenance center, which was very old. During the winter, the building was cold and it leaked from the rain, and during the summer, it had a tin roof. So you can imagine what it was like. And I dug into the numbers and was able to rebuild it without asking the taxpayers or residents for an additional dime. And I was able to persuade all my colleagues on that, and it was a 7-0 vote to do that. And we had the full spectrum of views on the council. Did the same thing again on the replacement of City Hall and the police station. Dug in the numbers, figured out a way to be able to do that without asking the residents for an additional dime. Why do I want to be treasurer? Because everything in my life has prepared me to be Oregon's treasurer. I'm also not interested in using it as a stepping stone for another position. I've got the skill set for eight years of service, knock wood, 8 years of service as the treasurer. I've also laid out very clearly, which I have here, one for each of the three of you, a platform for Oregon's financial future. It's a very detailed program of policies in all a variety of different areas. And you got it earlier, I think, when I emailed it in. No candidate for treasurer has ever been this specific in laying out what I want to do. It's a very forward-looking platform addressing areas like climate change, addressing areas of looking at the kicker, ways that we can do that, and working with the legislature to make life better for Oregonians, looking at property taxes. So a change in the way we do our property taxes is to provide opportunities, incentives for doing infill in a variety of other areas. I've also prepared myself to serve here. I've been attending the Oregon Investment Council meetings for close to 15 years. I've been attending the PERS board meetings for close to 15 years, as well as Oregon Saves, not 15 years on Oregon Saves, or the 529 programs, but I have been attending those meetings. And recently, within the last week, I was very pleased to get the endorsement of the immediate past chair of the PERS board, and he said, Jeff's got the experience, he's got the knowledge, he's prepared himself to serve, he's the one to be there, along with another person who recently endorsed me as Willie Myers, the immediate past executive secretary treasurer of the Columbia Pacific Trades Council, representing all the trade unions in the Portland metro area. These are two people who represent an awful lot of Oregonians. I'll call them the average Oregonians in our state. And as the PERS representatives, where you've got, I think it's close to 300,000 people in Oregon, either inside, currently working for the state, the county, the school district, the cities, or they have retired. Those are a lot of people, the heads of those two groups are saying, Jeff, you're the person to do it. It's because I've got a plan, I've got the experience, I've got the vision to go forward, and I can help make it happen without, again, not wanting to serve in any other position other than state treasurer.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the succinct introductions. Do you want to talk about your endorsements quickly?
Sure.
Since
Be happy to.
Jeff hit that, yeah.
Sure, be happy to. I had never planned to run for statewide office. I was very happy in the Senate. I've been very happy in the Senate. And Treasurer Reed approached me last summer. He's term limited. Our constitutional officers have a 2-term limit,
Yeah.
and he's term limited. He approached me last summer about running for the seat and urged me to take this on, and felt that I was the person most qualified to be his successor, and has in fact endorsed me, as has Randall Edwards, another one of our esteemed former treasurers. I haven't spent a lot of time reaching out to the other ones, but pretty sure I could get their endorsements as well. I have received the endorsements of all 6 Democratic members of our federal delegation, of both presiding officers, well, Speaker Rayfield's now Speaker Fahey, but her as well, the majority leaders, and a variety of electeds from across the state. One of the things I'm particularly proud of is that I've received endorsements from both Republicans and Democrats. And while I'm a staunch Democrat, and there's no doubt that my values are completely aligned, over my 12 years in the legislature, I've built really strong relationships across the state. So I have endorsements from Senator Finley and Senator Hansel, who represent geographically over 2/3 of our state. And I have endorsements from county commissioners in Union, Wallowa, Umatilla, Jefferson, Klamath, Benton,
Okay,
Washington counties.
Yeah. Well
Across the state.
represented. Okay.
Broadly represented, because I've spent a lot of time building those relationships, and I'm proud of that. In terms of the public employees, interesting about William Myers, because I have the endorsement of the building and construction trades, their current leadership. And I also have the endorsements of the vast majority of public employee unions, including SEIU, AFSCME, the Teachers Association, the School Employees Association. I have the endorsements of the nurses and Planned Parenthood, because of my staunch reproductive choice record.
Yeah, okay. That's
so-
great. There's a lot, we got a lot to get through here.
Yes, but sorry, you asked,
No,
and I
love it.
wasn't
No,
sure
love
where
it.
you were
No,
going.
Good. I think we got to talk about the elephant in the room here first, which is the unfunded liability in the pension fund, which recently stood, I think, 22.8 billion, which I think we have 78 cents for every dollar that we're going to owe retirees. Does that sound about right?
About 28 billion.
I have 23, but
Okay.
all right. What's 5 billion between friends? Why don't we start with you, Jeff? Why do we have this unfunded liability, and what are you going to do to take care of it?
You bet. I appreciate that question. About a year and a half ago, possibly even a little, almost 2 years ago, in one of the columns that I've written, and I've done it a number of columns on issues over the years, I advocated for, at the time, funding an additional $100 million a year into the PERS fund over and above the actuarial requirements. Because it was my belief that the decade of the 2020s, the returns were not going to be as substantive as they had been in the previous decade. If I was right, then we've helped shore up the system. If I was wrong, then we've been able to restore those cuts that were done to PERS members in the 2017 or 19 session. So far, my prediction is coming true. When you look at the last 2 years, 2022-23, basically the total value of the PERS funds did a full circle. From December 21 to December 23, and basically where they were then at the end of T21 and 20. That's one of the reasons it's contributing to the increase in the unfunded liability, because we need to, as you look over the entire projection, the actuaries, they're going on the assumption that we need to have a 6.9% return compounded annually going forward to be able, over a number of years, in this particular case I think it's 18 years, to bring that unfunded liability down to zero.
Starting when? Is it just in general or starting in a certain year?
For the 6.9. 6.9 was put in place a couple of years ago by the PERS board.
And you said you wanted to put in, you wanted to get another $100 million into this system. How are you going to do that?
One of the ways that it could be, there's a variety of ways that it could be done. One, it could be in competition with the other part in the general fund. Another one goes with the program that I'm proposing about relooking at the kicker. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like getting my kicker credit when it comes through. But we have given our state economists an impossible job. I can't predict my own income 2 years out, 2.5 years out, and much less trying to do that for the state. So fortunately, when, rightly or wrongly, when the kicker program was voted in by all of us as resident, there's an override built in. And a supermajority in both houses can redirect those funds. Now, it's not an automatic. It's going to be a very challenging and terrific challenge uphill battle to do that persuasion. But I think that there are opportunities to do so, particularly when you start talking about taking some of the money, whether it's for one-off projects throughout the state, shoring up the retirement system. That's a leadership position that I'm willing to take and go forth and fight to make that happen.
Wow. So you're calling for a tax increase, really, right? Because the kicker gets smaller.
Well, it is a tax increase in the sense that it's coming out of monies where you're having an impossible system when you start.
Right. Yeah. Understood.
So yes, as a soundbite, of course you could say it's
but
a
it's
tax.
interesting.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Thoughts on that and your solutions?
I would say several things that are, I'll take a slightly different approach than Jeff did. The unfunded liability is to some extent a construct, right? Which is to say that the unfunded liability goes up when the assumed earning rate goes down, right? So when the PERS board lowers the assumed earnings rate, which they've been doing steadily, that means, because of compounding, as Einstein said, the most powerful force in the universe, because of compounding, the unfunded liability goes up. It's not because we've necessarily lost money, although I don't disagree that returns over the past couple of years haven't been as robust as one might have hoped. But that's been true across the world and across the United States, and we've actually done better than many other institutional investors. So it's a little bit of an artifact to talk about the amount or even the percent of the unfunded liability. And while I absolutely agree that we need to do everything we can to maximize returns and reduce the unfunded liability, which will in turn mean that more current TAP money can go toward program rather than toward paying down the unfunded liability, I'm not sure focusing on percentages or the actual amount is an objective enough measure, because it can be changed by what the PERS board says is the assumed earnings rate.
It's our best guess, though, isn't it?
It is their best guess. And what I would also say is this. I will never forget, in 2013, I was the Senate co-chair of the General Government Subcommittee of Ways and Means. PERS board, PERS the agency, comes in front of that subcommittee. The then director of PERS put up a slide that showed in 1970, to get at that point they were talking about a 7.5% rate of return.
1970.
They were then, and even in 2013 we were sort of talking about that. In 1970, to do that, you had to have about 75% of your investments in public equity and the other 25% in fixed income. That's it.
Yeah.
2 areas.
Yeah.
2013, that pie chart looked a lot different, because there were many, many more different kinds of investments, public and private, that were there, and you have to balance all those things, and so the complexity goes up a lot. And sometimes what you see is that complexity makes it much harder to take a snapshot in time and believe that truly represents the funding level of the pension fund, right? So I think that's important to bear in mind as well. Do I like the idea of plussing up the pension fund? Sure, of course I do. But at $100 million a year, with a $28 billion or $22 billion even, we're talking about 220 years to do that. I mean, yes, compounding will make it a little shorter, but it's a lot, right?
Unless you find the next NVIDIA.
Yeah, not happening.
Joke. Little financial joke.
Yeah, I got it. I wish. So, and having served as co-chair of the budget committee now for 6 years, I'm a little hard-pressed to see where we'd get $100 million a year from general fund.
What about the kicker? How big is the kicker going to be this year?
$5.6 billion. The kicker's complicated. Jeff's not wrong that we could, in theory, do that, and that there is a mechanism, but it's a 2/3 majority. It's not even a 3/5 the way taxes are. And if you think you're going to get 2/3 of legislators to vote to override the kicker at any level, I would argue that's tough. So I don't disagree philosophically in theory, but from a pragmatic perspective, the reality is we are in this position because my long ago predecessors set up an unsustainable system, right? and in its current form. And the legislature has made over the past 30 years a series of changes to the public employee retirement system to adjust benefits, to change the ways to move from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. All of those things over time are going to make the biggest difference, right? But we're not going to get ourselves out of this hole simply by investing or simply by throwing more money into the fund. We have to basically deal with a time problem and
Deal with the time problem. How?
Well, I mean, if you're a tier 1 PERS beneficiary and you're on money match, then you're getting a lot more money than you actually earned. When I retire as a tier 2 beneficiary, because I've been a state employee since 1999, when I retire, I'll get the straight formula, right? The percentage times my years of service. But other people are getting a lot more than that, and that's why you see people getting pensions of $1 million a year.
So we have to wait out the tier 1 people.
Yes.
Can I offer some additional?
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay, please. The one thing I'm not going to do is do what the legislature did and help to offset the liability by taking it out of the employees of the system. I'm not going to do that.
Well, you can't.
Well, it was done by the legislature.
Well, no, I'm saying the treasurer doesn't play a role in making this
But it
decision.
was done when you were in the legislature.
That's absolutely true, and I'm not going to apologize for that.
And so that's something I'm not going to do. And secondly, we talked about, and your point is well taken, about the setting of the assumed rate of return, which drives so many things in the system. That over the years, that number has been moved up and has been moved down because you seek out the best advice that you can from the actuaries. And indeed, the actuaries will not sign off on the audited financial statements if they don't think that the projected rate of return that you have represents what the reality is. Yes, as you described, I have to quote wait out the tier 1, but in the meantime, it's taking significant sums of money at the state level, the county, the city, and the schools, where it's money going to fund the retirement that could be going into programs. And yes, it is an enormously complicated system, but it needs to be addressed.
Do you want to address the vote that Jeff's talking about?
Sure, happily. One of the things you learn in life in general, and certainly over a long service in the legislature, is that oftentimes you're required to balance two good things, right? You don't get both of them. And in the case of the PERS reforms that I voted for in 2013 and 2019, and I've owned that perfectly happily, it was a question of, do we protect schools right now, or do we have a higher cost of living adjustment, for example, for retirees? And as a tier 2 beneficiary, I'm cutting my own pension. And I'm doing that because otherwise Oregon schools are facing classrooms with 36 kids in a first grade classroom, and no first grader is going to learn with 35 other kids running around. So everything we do at every time is a question of balancing often two significant competing goods. Did I like cutting pensions? No, of course I didn't, right? I cut my own. And I did it because I have to think about the long game, because if we don't protect current recipients of services the state government provides, then we're setting ourselves for a cycle of the state heading in the wrong direction, because kids don't get the education they deserve, people don't get the health care they need, we don't make the investments in infrastructure, all of those things, we don't have the troopers on the road, right? So as a budget person and as somebody who cares deeply about Oregon's kids, I made a choice at the time that was not easy, that I didn't like, and that I'd make again.
Okay.
And that's the legislature's decision. But to be clear, I don't think there's one other thing that we can constitutionally do to change pension benefits for existing employees at this time.
There is not.
There's nothing. So to say that you wouldn't do it is lovely, and it's the legislature's choice, but I don't think there's anything left to do.
Okay.
I think we've done what we can do, and we had to do it.
Yeah.
You have to make tough choices. That's why we get elected, is to make tough choices.
Do either of you guys want to?
I was going to.
Oh, you want to ask?
Yeah, there's a difference here. There are many things that we agree on with respect to the question of PERS. But one difference that's coming out through our discussion here is that one approach is let it be for the next 18, 20 years and we'll just go forward.
That's not exactly what I said, but go on.
My approach is to take a proactive approach to say there is an opportunity here with the kicker. Yes, will it be difficult? Will it be challenging? No question. I mean, good. As I said, I like getting my kicker. Okay, I'm sure you all like getting your kicker. But that's an opportunity to help address the needs of all Oregonians, and that's a leadership role that the treasurer can take, and I will take it.
Okay. Do either of you want to ask a question before we get into private equity and climate and a few other things?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Why are you running in the Democratic primary?
You know, you're not the first person to ask me that question.
Well, I mean, we've seen you here before as a Republican on 3 consecutive cycles.
2. But thank you for asking. You're absolutely right. The values that I have, starting with the respect for and the dignity of every individual, the opportunity to provide help to people when they're down, to help heal them when they are sick, to make sure that we have equality of opportunity in fact and not just in theory. These are values that have been important to me all of my life, as well as protecting our environment. You know, Tom McCall, one of the great Republicans in our state, and quite frankly, the Republican Party has left me. And so my values are now more consistent with the Democratic Party, and so I made the choice on my own timeline that I'm going to change parties to where it reflects my values.
So this is about Trump?
That certainly was one element of it. I did not vote for him in 2016. I did not vote for him in 2020, and I will not be voting for him in 2024.
Good?
I'm good.
Okay. Lucas, anything?
Go. It sounds
Okay.
like you're going to get
No, this is just, okay. Can we talk about private equity for a minute?
Of course.
This is an area that fascinates me. Right now, the actual amount of private equity in the portfolio stands at 28.6%. This is as of February.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a denominator problem, but we can talk about that.
It is the denominator problem.
It's a denominator
That's all. Is
problem.
what it really is.
Yes.
Nevertheless, the target for that is 17.5 to 27.5. And denominator problem or not, what you're seeing is a lot of pension funds who were overweight, I would say arguably overweight in private equity, are now having to sell these stakes on the secondary market at a discount.
I understand that.
And I've asked the Treasury if they've had to do that. I haven't heard back yet. But that's, in my mind, that's just an unforced error if you have to sell something at a discount just because of your... But I know it's because public equities have gone down.
Right.
But that begs the question that are we overweight in private equity? Let's start there. Let's just start there.
You know, one of the things that Jeff talks about a lot is that you have a lot of investment experience. I have some, quietly, but I'm not an expert. But that's not the treasurer's job to be the expert in it. That's why we have a chief investment officer. That's why we have internal managers. That's why we work with external professionals. That's why we have consulting firms who work with us. So what I would say is I don't yet know the answer to that question, and after the primary, assuming I win, which I think I will, I gotta say,
Yeah, of course.
You know,
Yes. I do too. So.
You do? Good. I'm glad you do.
I do.
You know, one of the things that Treasurer Reed has committed to is reaching out to the nominees from both parties and offering them the opportunity to come in and start spending a lot of time at Treasury. And while I haven't attended as many meetings as Jeff, because I've been working full-time at things that have kept me from attending those meetings, I will, after the primary, have the time to invest to start talking with all of these people internally and externally to learning more answers to that question. I have started to have conversations with investment experts nationally to learn what I can. So what I would say is this. If we're at 28 point, what did you say, percent? 3? And the maximum is 27.5, we're over, but not by a ton. And most private equity investments are intended to be longer term. And as public equities recover, then you don't have the denominator problem anymore. So as a percentage of the total portfolio, it goes down naturally. So I don't yet know for sure whether we do. If we are, I'm going to look really hard as whether it's better to gut it out and wait for those funds to mature so that you're not selling them on the secondary market at a discount, because that seems highly problematic to me, right?
Yeah, Goldman's buying, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure they are, because they're not wrong, because ultimately those funds will pay off. So I think you have to you cannot respond. Being a sensible investor means not responding in the minute to everything. It means taking a long view. It means waiting it out. It means not responding through emotion, but through the best available evidence. As a physician, I've spent a lot of my life
Evidence-based.
evidence-based.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I'll do with the investing.
Okay. Jeff, too much private equity in the portfolio?
But this is the advantage that I bring of 45 years experience in investing and budgeting. So I understand when the best investment professionals in the world are coming to Oregon asking for investing some of our funds. Not only do I understand what they're saying and the assumptions behind what they're saying, I also understand what they're not saying. And we can come back to more of that later on. On the public-private equity, when you look over the last 30, 40 years, just the number of public companies in just the last 25 years has gone from 10,000 to 4,000. So the number of opportunities in the public markets has decreased. So the fact that the number of private companies in the US and indeed in the world has increased dramatically over that same time period. Now, having said that, if you look at the total percentage that you have there, the total between public equity and private equity, and the target that they have for that, between the total of the two, it's just slightly out of balance. But overweighted in private equity, underweighted in public equity. At the last Investment Council meeting, Rex Kim, the Chief Investment Officer, came before the PERS board meeting and laid out the systematic plan that they have over the next few years to bring things back in balance. They're aware it's over that. And as you pointed out, it's a denominator problem. If you have one sector moving up more quickly than the other, it looks out of whack. It's not something exactly as was said. I agree. You don't want to just have a knee-jerk reaction to make those changes. Investment through Rex and his leadership, they have that. They presented that to the Oregon Investment Council that the treasurer sits on. To bring that back into line over the next few years. So is it a concern at a particular point in time? Yes. Is it something that you want to jump on right away? No, because there is a plan in place to address that over the next few years.
Okay. So let's do another question. This is a bigger question about private equity. Talk about Oregon values. Do you think private equity embodies Oregon values?
I think that's an it depends question.
Okay.
I'm often a truth lies somewhere in between person.
Yeah.
And one of the things that private equity does, for example, it gives opportunities to invest early in companies that have an opportunity to grow well. There's a difference, obviously, between venture capital and private equity.
That sounds a little more venture-y.
I understand that, but my point is that sometimes companies need earlier, once they're past the venture stage, they still need investment of capital to grow, right? That's absolutely true, and that's one of the things that private equity provides. Now, there are private equity companies that do this right, and they do it in ways that don't mess with corporate governance in inappropriate ways. And there are also companies, private equity funds, that do it in a way to help companies that are struggling, and they bring in the expertise to help get them back on their feet again. Mm-hmm. Those are all good. My concern with private equity comes from a couple of areas, and these are some of the things that I'm looking at really hard. The first of these is when private equity comes in and looks at profit above everything else. And you may know that during the 2024 legislative session, there was a bill to basically minimize the likelihood that private equity would be buying healthcare organizations in Oregon, right?
Yeah.
Because naturally, we have seen private equity getting into the healthcare space, and often, not always, there are some good actors in this field, often putting profits ahead of patient care. And as I said, as a physician myself, that doesn't make me very happy. To say, we're going to admit this patient because they have great insurance, and we're not going to admit that patient who has exactly the same problem because they don't, that's not okay. And if private equity is saying that, which they are in some cases, that's not acceptable. So as we invest in private equity, we have to be sure that their values around corporate governance, are congruent with ours, that their values around environmental impact of the funds that they're approaching are congruent with ours. And
Do you think that's the case now?
I don't know enough to know. I mean, I
Do you
think,
think it's the case now?
For the most part, yes, but there are opportunities to do better. One, and you mentioned we're going to talk about climate going forward in one of our other topics. We have a recent example in Australia where you had Woodside Energy, which is the dominant player of providing energy in Australia. They laid out a climate action plan. The institutional investors in Australia and elsewhere said this is not good enough. And also what you've been doing isn't good enough. So they banded together and they forced them to move in a different direction. That's one of the opportunities that you have with the position and the size of the investment that we have.
but only in
Oregon.
public equity, not in private.
In private equity, correct, that is only in public equity, but you also have that same opportunity in private equity by establishing the standards you want in advance. Now, that's a very delicate dance because we have a legally requirement fiduciary responsibility to establish when the risk parameters that are established, we are responsible to the members of the retirement system, to the members in 529, to Oregon Saves, first and foremost. But I think we have examples if they're in violation of international law. Okay, I think anybody's going to agree. If the company's in violation of international law, we don't want to be a part of that company.
So what do we do now? So, I mean, everybody here probably knows the history of KKR in Oregon, right? I mean, Oregon basically made KKR, right? We were its first big institutional investor along with Washington, and, Goldberg, Kravis, and Roberts owe us all a debt of gratitude. KKR, as you know, you could probably name a company in Multnomah County that KKR owns.
Yeah, Fred Myers. Well, that was the initial. That's when it began.
I'm thinking of one. They own the ambulance system. They own AMR, GMR and AMR.
Yeah, and we have issues.
And we have big issues. I mean, Lucas has written a lot about this.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, the company's debt trades at something like 50 cents on the dollar now. It's on the verge of collapse.
And
How
we're not
can
providing
we-
the care that Oregonians deserve.
How can we, as an investor in KKR funds, not in the particular fund that owns that company by chance, but we're big investors in KKR, so how does one justify the investment with KKR against KKR really taking this vital asset and, running it into the ground? The only reason this company's on its, well, there's a couple reasons. The biggest reason this company's on its back, if you ask me, and if you ask analysts, is because they freighted it with debt, which is what private equity does.
Right.
They don't spend their own money.
Nope.
They spend other people's money.
Yes, that's
So
absolutely
what
true.
do we do about this? I mean, does this need an overhaul?
Well, that's a much bigger question than just what the Oregon Treasurer is going to do, because that's a question about private equity as a whole.
It is, but
right?
I think as an institutional investor, you have to ask it, don't
Oh,
you?
absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. And I have been asking, and I will be asking exactly those questions. One of the challenges, first of all, you have to have those parameters. As Jeff said, as I've said, you have to have parameters for the kinds of investments that you're willing to engage in. You have to look hard at the funds and how they engage with the corporations that they invest in. You also have to be careful because legally you can't dig in once the fund's going and you've invested in it. You can't dig in and push hard, because then if the fund doesn't do well, other investors can hold Oregon liable. So we have to be extremely careful about that, because there are very clear parameters around this from a federal level, right? So we have to be very careful about that. Going forward, as we look at which of our private equity investments we're going to keep, which ones we're going to let go once hopefully we've been able to see them to maturity and we've gotten our money back out and then some. But as we look at where we invest next, we have to look hard at these questions around corporate governance and whether they're actually doing things that help the companies thrive, that don't saddle them with enormous amounts of debt, that don't disadvantage the people that those companies are serving at for the benefit of investors, because that's part of Oregon values, right? And that's one of the things that I'm talking about. So you have to be looking at companies, at private equity firms that don't have these track records. KKR has some funds that are basically okay, and other ones, like this one with AMR, that are very problematic. And I think it's important also to recognize that individual funds within a large entity can be structured differently, and you have to look at the funds individually as well as looking at the company, the overall institution.
Yeah, okay.
And
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, and just another, and it's an additional, it's a difficult question, it's a nuanced question, and there are trade-offs. That if we start pushing too hard, and I'm not saying we shouldn't push hard and to have it represented whenever possible, the Oregon values that we want the best investors investing the money on our behalf. They may simply say, I'll go somewhere else to get money. And therefore we're going to be losing out. Now, it may be worth, depending on what the parameters of each individual fund, when they come to us asking for money, it may be worth to say no. But we also have to be careful to say, as has been pointed out, in other funds, they've absolutely been consistent with the kinds of thing we have, that we want. So, a lot of nuance, a lot of detail, but you want to always go into it reflecting what are our values and what are we trying to accomplish.
One of the things that I've done routinely in my career in the legislature, and sometimes I've been called to task for it, but I'm not going to apologize for that either, is asking a lot of really hard questions, right? I mean, you've seen me, several of you have seen me in committee and in other places, settings, ask very hard questions of people who are testifying. That experience has taught me how to really dig in when someone looks as if they're hand waving. I'm going to dig in and ask the question. I'm never afraid to admit what I don't know.
You mean hand waving like...
Like just sort of saying something vaguely,
yeah.
Right? And not really digging into the
So
details.
you've met some pension consultants then?
Oh yeah. I've met a lot of people who like to hand wave. But
Yeah.
my point is that's exactly the same approach that I'll take in as being treasurer when I'm learning about and when I'm asking these questions about our investments, because I know how to do that and I've proven that.
Okay. Let's go to climate, because Treasurer Reed has been under pressure to do something about
Sure.
divestment. There's a lot of opinions about that. If you become treasurer, what will be your position on divesting the fund from fossil fuels, either in public equities or
Sure.
private equities, however? You want to take that one
Sure.
first, Jeff?
The core of the Treasurer Reed's plan that was presented at the Investment Council in February had two key elements. Number one is to use the institutional power we have, our voting power, in public companies to band with other institutional investors to come together and say, Company X, you have presented a climate action plan, we're going to hold you to it. Or if you haven't done a climate action plan, we want you to do a climate action plan. So that's opportunity number one. Opportunity number two within that presentation was to triple our investments in renewables between the end of 2023 to the end of 2035. The two asset categories which are listed there were in real assets and in private equity, going from $2 billion to $6 billion in 13 years. Well, what was interesting about that particular meeting was, tripling investments in renewables sounds like a good thing. If you were saying, okay, well, through the decades of experience that I bring, I get suspicious at standalone numbers. There's the hairs on the back of my head saying what's being done. So and you look at what was to go from $2 billion to $6 billion over the next 13 years is a compound annual rate of return of about 9.5%. Then I looked at the two asset categories that are being proposed for that tripling, which is real assets and in private equity. Looked at how have they done over the last 10 years. Now, not that necessarily the last 10 years, the past may not be prologue, but in the last 10 years, those two asset categories on a combined basis did about 11.2%. So the proposal in the climate action plan that was put together had one really good element, bringing institutional pressure along with other pension funds, and another element which was, I will call, hand waving. I like that phrase, thank you. Because it wasn't even doing as well as we've done in the past. And we can do better. But that's the kind of experience that I'm going to bring to bear, because I'm asking and thinking about those kinds of questions. And that question, unfortunately, the material was not available until, if you were in the audience, until you were at the meeting. But everybody in the Investment Council had that material. That question did not even come up.
Okay. Do you want to let's get your opinion on...
So while those are the two strategies that were proposed, I think it's important for your viewers to understand the goal first. The goal is to get the entire portfolio to net carbon neutral by 2050 and to reduce our carbon footprint in our portfolio by 50% by 2035. Those are really important goals, and they're going to take doing more than just those 2 points that Jeff pointed out, right? Because we also have to think one of the things that many Oregonians would like us to do is disinvest from fossil fuels, right? So we're going to have to be looking at that because obviously the carbon load there is very high. One of my concerns is that the report that was prepared by McKinsey and frankly new SEC rules that came out about a month ago about disclosure about climate don't include Scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are the ones that are created by, if you take a transportation company, I'm going to pick on poor UPS just because I happened to see a UPS truck when I was driving here. If you take UPS, they're trying to make a transition to cleaner fuel vehicles locally, but they're still flying planes all over the world, and they're still driving long-haul trucks which run on diesel all over the country, right, and all over other countries. And those are Scope 3 emissions. All of those modes of transportation emit carbon. So we have to think hard about all of those emissions in addition to the obvious ones like a fossil fuel company that's extracting carbon-intense products from the ground and putting them to use in ways that are obviously going to contribute to climate change, right? So one of the things I'm committed to is taking an even broader look at how we evaluate carbon emissions from companies. Additionally, what I don't think this plan takes into consideration, although it's not directly related to carbon emissions, is the impact of climate change on a company's function, right? To go back to a logistics company like UPS, if there's a major storm, as we see all the time, how many times in the past few years have you gotten a notice from UPS saying your package is delayed because of a blizzard, a tornado, a something, right? So we have to evaluate if we're looking at smart investments or if we're thinking about private equity and the investments they're making, are they taking into consideration climate-associated risks? Is a manufacturing plant located close enough to an ocean that they're going to be affected by sea level rise? Are they close enough to an ocean that they're going to be affected by flooding from hurricanes, right? All of these things as a fiduciary, and the federal government has a very strict definition of fiduciary for retirement plans, right? And that has to be the first thing the treasurer pays attention to.
Can you be a responsible fiduciary for pension, holders and take a stand on climate?
Yes.
Yes.
For
100%.
So tell me. So you're not going to. You don't. There's a very good chance you might sacrifice returns.
Well, it depends on how you do it, right? So if you say, I'm walking in there on January 1st, and by July 1st, we're going to disinvest from all fossil fuels, then no, you cannot, you will be sacrificing returns.
And
right?
that's against your fiduciary duty.
That's against the fiduciary duty. If, on the other hand,
might take a haircut.
you think?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, actually, no, they wouldn't take a haircut.
They wouldn't take a haircut. The problem is our unfunded liability would go through the roof, and the amount that current employers are paying in
goes up.
Goes up,
Yeah.
right? So yes, important clarification.
Sure.
Retirees wouldn't feel it, school kids would.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? Just to be clear,
sure.
right?
Yeah, gotcha.
If, on the other hand, you say, okay, here's our goal. Right now, fossil fuel companies are profitable, and we need to, as Jeff said, and as the treasurer said, use our power as an institutional investor to come together with other major institutional investors to push them to invest in renewable resources, renewable energy, right? Which some companies are starting to do, but nowhere at the level that we want to see them, right? We need to push there. If we don't see that, then we can make a transition plan, right? Everything requires a transition plan. You cannot do anything overnight in pretty much anything we do, anything big like this, but certainly not in transitioning a portfolio to net carbon zero, a portfolio that at the moment it stands at about $95 billion, depending on which day you look at it, right? So you don't necessarily have a problem with meeting your fiduciary responsibility as long as you do it in a very thoughtful, deliberate, gradual way where over time the companies that have high carbon emissions, the amount goes down in your portfolio, and the companies with low carbon emissions go up to offset them.
And I think to be clear, there is no forecast that I've read, either coming out of the United States government, the International Energy Agency, that says that oil and gas is going to be with us for decades to come.
They're saying that.
They're saying that.
They're
Now,
saying that,
I mean,
yeah.
that's
100%.
it's projections, and projections change as you get better data, better information,
Sure.
et cetera. So there will be, not only do we have to continue to decarbonize our economy, that's just a given. We have no choice. But there's also going to be opportunities to make money in oil and gas because it's not going away completely.
Yeah.
But that is not contradictory to also wanting to decarbonize the economy and to decarbonize the portfolio. But here's a couple of things that we can do in the short term that the Treasurer's Office does have the opportunity to do. And number one, as part of just explaining and putting out their climate risk, the state is issuing debt on an ongoing basis. Whenever debt gets issued, there is a bond prospectus put out. It is a document, as I describe it, written by lawyers for lawyers. But it contains in it a risk factor section. Right now, there is nothing in the risk factor section for Oregon debt when it gets issued that talks about the impact of climate change on the Oregon economy. I can't put a specific number on it that would be accurate, but qualitatively, we all know that it is having an impact on the Oregon economy. There is no fundamental reason that we can't get the attorneys to come up with the language based upon the direction of the Treasurer to say, the next time we issue debt and every time thereafter, we're going to have a statement in there that says there's a climate risk and an impact to the ability of the state to repay the debt. The institutional investors already know this. They're factoring it in the pricing. We're behind the curve on that one. Number two,
No, keep going.
Okay, number two is we have an opportunity, particularly with the Elliott State Research Forest, where we're going on that, and it's a good thing where we're doing on that. Carbon credits. It's low-hanging fruit. We're not going to be doing a lot of logging in the Elliott State Forest. Depending on where it goes, we may not do any logging. But there's opportunities every year to sell carbon credits. Right now, those are going for about $25 to $50 an acre. That's money that can go into the education, common school fund. Now, we have about 1 million acres of ownership, so $25 to $50 is $50 million a year. In the scheme of things, not a lot. Okay, but
Better than poking out with a sharp stick.
yes, I don't think I'd be quite yes, but yes. And so these are just a couple of things that the Treasurer can do now. We have the short term, the intermediate term, the long term. The long term approach is as we go. 2050, we're going to get there. But here's a couple of action items we can take immediately, and the Treasurer can take the lead on that.
Do you think that, I mean, you've seen BlackRock and a lot of these companies back off of climate pledges, and you're hearing a lot less about.
I think there's a, well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, you can dispute that. I mean,
No, I don't disagree with you. I think
Yeah.
the question is why.
Yeah.
I think that's the more
Well, I
interesting
mean,
question.
So, does it matter, really? I mean, does it matter if, I mean, are we going to move the dial if Oregon
So no,
divests and we
right.
say, and we're going to,
No,
I mean,
no,
or is this
on
like
our own,
Multnomah County saying
so-
something about
no,
Gaza? You know what I mean?
No, right. So don't get me started there. No, we're not. And anybody who claims otherwise is wrong. But if every single state, if every single country says, well, if we just do this by ourselves, we're not getting anywhere, then we don't get anywhere.
yeah.
Right.
Right? And if Oregon, as one of the largest pension funds in the country, right? Just to be crystal clear, Oregon has one of the largest pension funds in the country. It's bigger than the sovereign wealth of many nations.
It's all that private equity we've been in for 30 years.
Yeah, well, there's that. There's that.
Go on.
And it's also the fact that we put all of our public employees
Yeah.
into one fund,
Yeah.
unlike many other states. So if you, if we, as one of the largest funds in the country, make this change and demonstrate that it's doable, and are, as Oregon has been in some very positive ways over many, many years in a lot of areas, been a leader in setting a trend, right? I came to Oregon to do my residency here in part because of the Oregon Health Plan, which passed in 1989, got implemented at the beginning of 1994, and I came because it was groundbreaking in terms of how we think about Medicaid and delivering healthcare services to low-income people, right?
Yeah.
We can be a leader in this way again. And even if our specific portfolio doesn't make an enormous difference, we can model that it's completely doable.
So we punch above our weight here.
We do.
We're this little state where we
100%.
got this big pot of money.
100%.
And
That's exactly
the guys who
correct.
kick air are coming through every day,
Yep.
every quarter, and okay.
Oregon
Yes.
Saves is an example where we
Great.
led. I mean, we were we not been the first.
Yeah,
we
I
weren't the
remember
first
working on that
legislatively,
bill.
but we were the first to actually get it up and going. And so, yes, we can
Yeah.
be a leader again.
All right.
You got about 5 minutes.
Yeah, we got about 5 minutes. Why don't we? Is there anything we didn't hit here that you've been dying to get in, and you haven't been able to say? Because somebody like me has been making jokes about. Do you want to try to give you a Black-Scholes problem? You want to do some options decay? We could.
I can pop in.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, the answer to your question is no, but go ahead, Aaron.
But the answer is to your question, yes, I'll be happy to.
I got a question that has nothing to do with investments or pensions.
Good.
I would like to know, should the governor's wife have a policy-making role in her office?
Okay, that's completely unrelated to the treasurer's position. I
If
mean,
you're running for a statewide office, I'd like to know your opinion.
okay. In many states, the governor's spouse does have a role. I don't understand at the moment what the governor's wife has been doing or not doing. Do I think that the governor's wife or spouse of any kind could have a role in there? Yes. Do I think that it's important to do so in a very transparent, clear, well-defined way? Yes. And I hope that that's the direction that they're moving. So I don't know enough about the particulars of this situation. I do know that there are other states where the role of the governor's spouse is much better defined and much more significant. And it's quite possible that, especially given the size of this state, that would be appropriate in Oregon.
Yeah.
Treasurer Reed, by the way, said he would not consult his wife, or she would not have any role.
Well, I don't have a spouse, so there you go.
Right. But just for context.
And I don't have a spouse either, so we're on the same on that one. I think the question that you've raised to me is the secondary issue. One, the optics are bad. Okay, give me that. But I'm more concerned with. It appears, and again, I don't have all the facts either. It appears that a number of her top people are leaving because of that. So my concern going forward is, are the people around the governor going to be willing to speak up on issues where her wife says, I don't like this, and the people around the governor are going to say, no, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And my concern is that when you're in a statewide position, it is so easy to get caught in a bubble. We fight against it. My concern is that getting people who will be willing to speak their minds because they have seen what has happened, because the new people coming in are not going to have all the facts that went around because they weren't there. So that's my primary concern. Secondary concern is, I think, whether it's been a formal basis or an informal basis, spouses of statewide elected officials in Oregon and throughout the country have always been involved in some way, shape, or form. But the way this has been gone about could have been done better.
Yeah. Is there one thing that when you're looking, you've obviously both been studying this job and this endeavor of yours. Is there one thing that if you get elected, you just can't wait to get your hands on, like when you buy a house and you want to remodel, and you're like, oh my God, I just
Go
can't
for
wait to
it.
turn
Go
that
for it,
stairway
Jeff.
around.
Go for it,
What
Jeff.
what are you dying to get your hands on in the Treasury and fix?
Well, number one, you've got my platform statement there. There's a lot of different areas that I want to go in. So there's immediate steps, short-term steps, intermediate steps, and long-term steps. I think the first one is to consistently present the full picture on the facts. And it's something I've talked about. K through 12 education funding. It was a historic amount of money, but when you look at it on a per capita inflation-adjusted basis, it was actually less in this biennium than the last time. Legislature patted itself on the back, had press releases saying it's historic. Well, on a standalone basis, it was. So the number one item that I want to do is always to make sure that you're presenting the full context of something, to work with the legislature so they have a full understanding of that. Because if you ask the average person in the street, they remember the historic funding, yet you're also seeing all the time in all the news, on all the different media outlets, the schools are suffering. So,
And you're saying that we're just not accounting for inflation,
or the number of students.
or the number of students?
Yeah, when you adjust it, the numbers are down.
Okay.
But, okay, well, there's two separate questions in here. question of what he wants to do as treasurer, something about reporting facts. The school funding question, we can talk about if you want, but if you want me to talk about what I want to do as treasurer, we can do that too.
Let's talk about what we want to do as treasurer.
Okay. I want to make sure that every single program we've got going that helps Oregonians save for their future is working at its highest level, is the most accessible possible. And one of the most exciting opportunities that we have that some states are already doing, or some local jurisdictions like New York City, is partnering with philanthropy or other donors or finding some public funds to create a baby bond program. Baby bonds are savings accounts that are set up for every kid born in the state the minute they're born, or as soon as they have a social security number, and held collectively, for example, in the case of Maine, where I was spending a lot of time talking with them about how they're doing it, and invested together so that you can actually invest them in a smart way, but help the account is visible to the family, and then the kid can access those when they're 18. And they can be used not only for education, but also for a first car so they can get to work, or saving more for a down payment on a home, or reducing their need for debt to get education and have that kind
And
of
how do we fund it? Do they fund it?
They fund. There's lots of different ways to fund it. In many cases, they're funded with philanthropic dollars, right?
You got
And-
philanthropy to...
Yep.
Wow. Is the
Partnering.
individual
There-
making contributions?
You can.
Or the
There
state
are-
may? 'Cause that doesn't
all
matter.
of the above. All of
Really?
the above.
Yeah.
You can do it in any number of ways, and different states have different models for different. New York City's doing it. The whole entire state of Maine is doing it. They're much smaller than us, but there are
How are
states.
they funding it? How are they getting...
Dexter Shoe Company, the philanthropy set up by the Dexter family.
is putting enough money in for every baby born?
$500 for every single kid born.
They get
Now-
$500, they put it in an index fund or something.
Yeah.
But actually now, because there's enough of it in there, it's being invested not just in index funds, but in analogous ways to the way you invest a significant portfolio with some diversity, so that in the long term, because these are long-term funds, these are long-term
Yeah.
investments, that money grows at a much higher rate.
So
than
it's sort of a pension fund, but starting at birth.
It's not.
Yes,
It's an
not a
opportunity
pension fund.
An
It's-
opportunity
right.
fund.
That's a fine way to phrase it. Yes,
Interesting.
but I have been doing a lot of research on this. I have talked to people nationwide, treasurers in other states, the New York comptroller who's in charge of their program there, to philanthropies that are funding this, to external managers who are helping manage these funds, and to potential partners in the state about exactly how we would do this in Oregon. It would be transformative.
It almost
for
has
the
a
state.
little, a little bit of a feel of UBI.
It does,
I mean,
except
light,
that it's
very
not.
light.
It's not. It's very,
Very
light.
light.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it's not an ongoing commitment by
It's-
the
oh, it's a
state.
one-off- it's like-
it's a one-off
So
investment.
you just,
So you put the money in. You offer the opportunity for anybody, just like right now, anybody can put money into a child's 529.
Yeah, yeah.
If your kids have a 529, any
Told you,
family
power user.
right? That's great. Do you
Keep
do
it
it with
up.
your do you have it connected with your bottle drop?
we do.
Good, good, excellent. And more people need to know about that, right? This is what I'm
No,
talking
I love
about.
that. I think we have
Optimizing.
$500 in that account.
There you go. This is what we talk about, optimizing all of our programs. There are a lot of people. I was talking to 2 college-educated women in December, both of whom have young children. One of them knew about the connection of the bottle drop, the other didn't, right? It's our job to make sure that every family
Yeah.
knows about all these options. So for baby bonds, just like for 529s, college savings plans, you can have anybody who wants puts money into an individual child's account, although it's held collectively,
And it just-
right? And it grows, right?
Yeah.
Compound interest, man, most
Yeah.
powerful.
You got a
force
little
in the
problem with the Monte Carlo simulation. Like you could get a good year, a bad year. You get,
You
but
could,
fine.
but think
over
about,
time.
but think
over
about,
time.
right. But the point is, if
Yeah.
you put it in when a kid's 18, an 18-year time when the kid's born,
Yeah.
an 18-year time horizon is
Yep.
long enough that
It'll
over
smooth
time
out.
it's going to smooth
Yeah.
out and grow.
As long as we-
And
yeah.
so, in addition to optimizing everything we've already got,
You want to do this?
I want to do this, and I have plans, and I have a way to do it. And it's exciting that
Who's
Jeff's
gonna
picked up.
put the money in?
That's a conversation that I'm having. I
You can
am
tell us
not.
tomorrow.
No, I
Yeah,
cannot.
cool.
Nope.
We'll
nope.
keep it-
I'll tell you what, Anthony. I'm a doctor. I am so well trained in confidentiality, man. I know. Look, I mean, you know how things blow up, and I'm glad that Jeff's come on board.
How about
That
the
wasn't
kicker?
something you were
Let's
supporting.
put some of
and-
the kicker in there.
Well, okay. So here's the problem. Here's the problem with the kicker. Taking the kicker. Besides the voting problem.
Yeah.
Right? The problem is there are a lot of Oregonians, lower income Oregonians, who need that money. The other problem
right.
is it's regressive, right? So very
Yeah.
high income Oregonians get a lot of money back, don't really need it, don't know why they're getting it back, don't notice it, and the families that really do need it are not getting as much back. And if you capped the kicker, giving the kicker back at about 300%, or like 1.5%, 1.5 times, 150% of the average median income, 90% of Oregonians would get their kicker
We
back.
still get a kicker.
Right?
Yeah.
And the remainder
At a
you
hun-
could use for a variety of
But that-
purposes.
yeah.
Right? Whether that's paying down the
Yeah.
unfunded liability.
But don't
or-
you think, I mean,
But that's a separate problem, and
Yeah.
that
But you have a
requires.
different political problem there, which is rich guys like giving money to campaigns.
That's true, and I don't have a problem with not getting money if that's the reason why. Because if I'm always going to do what's best for the state.
Sure, I'm just saying that I'm not personally trying to
No. I understand
implicate
that.
you in this so
No.
much as I'm saying that you have a political problem that the people who would be capped are the ones who love giving money to stop things from being capped.
I understand that, and I think the bigger political problem is that, and there are pros and cons to this, neither chamber has a 2/3 majority of either party, certainly not Democrats, and even getting some Democrats to vote for what is essentially a tax increase, as Anthony said earlier, is challenging, right? It's going to be hard to do. And so you have to be really thoughtful about how you approach it. But it's a much bigger conversation that needs to happen statewide.
Well, don't you think you could just pit the middle class against the rich and you could win that way? Speaking as the middle class, I would be thrilled. I'd go to
in
war.
the best of all possible worlds, yes.
But-
one of the problems is that people vote against their own self-interest on a routine basis. If you look at political science and if you look at how people vote, you see that all the time.
this is related. And I think the answer to this informs this. Would you have structured the preschool for all tax in Multnomah County the way they did?
No.
Why?
For a bunch of reasons. The first is that one of the things that's worked well in this country is collectively paying into something that's proportionately, right? So if you think about, for example, property taxes going for schools, or
Social
paying for
Security.
firefighting, or Social Security
Yeah,
for that matter,
right.
it's a collective, even if I don't have kids at all, or I don't have, my kids are grown and not in school anymore, I'm still paying into Portland Public Schools with my property taxes. And that's as it should be, because we all benefit from it. But to only have really wealthy people paying who can probably afford preschool on their own so that lower income people can do it, that's a problem. The second problem is that if you live in Washington County, but you work in Multnomah County, you pay that tax if you're making enough money, but you don't get that benefit, and your kids don't get to go to preschool
Yeah.
there. And that's a problem too, because that's inequitable, and you're essentially, it's not quite taxation without representation, but it's pretty darn close, right? So I understand the intent, and I appreciate the intent, and I think we should have preschool for all, and I don't think this is the right way to structure it.
Yeah. Well, plus now you've got all these people leaving.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
I
That's
keep
a
hearing this.
That's a separate.
But I mean,
it's
but
also true,
to
because
your
it makes
point-
it unsustainable, right?
Right. I mean,
so it's the intent was great.
Yeah.
Completely support the
Yeah.
intent. The structure, highly problematic, and I think that's where
Were you
we
smart
think-
enough not to vote for it?
Yes.
You were?
Yes.
I'm not in Multnomah County.
Right.
I mean, look, did I believe in? I mean, there are a lot of things that I believe in that I didn't vote for because they weren't structured well.
Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
my job as a legislator has been to look hard at what's being put in front of me and try to understand if it's really doing what the intent is and if it's doing it in a plausible way.
Yeah.
Didn't
yeah.
do that.
And, I'm sorry.
We got to wrap up.
We got to wrap.
Yeah, sorry.
I-
Oh, go wait. You got to go someplace? Oh,
let's just
Okay.
do this.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I'm half Sicilian. I could talk forever. These guys are like, Jesus, is he going to stop asking questions? No, anyway,
I was
did you
just-
want to add one thing? And then we're going to do our last question.
Okay.
And it's a fun one.
I always
super fun one.
Always enjoy your
All right,
fun
go on.
question. I am delighted that Senator Steiner has come to what I've been proposing in this from the get-go. The proposal on the kick, looking at the kicker to try and make it happen. Perhaps I'm stronger on trying to make it happen. And baby bonds. I've talked about it in here from the start. So I'm delighted that Senator
You weren't
Steiner.
supportive
Wait,
of baby
so-
bonds 4 years ago.
Wait, so you guys are, is this a who's had the baby bond idea
Well,
first?
I mean, I wasn't thinking about running for treasurer 4 years ago, so I can't claim that I had the idea. But 4 years ago, you compared it to moving vegetables around on a toddler's plate.
Whoa.
I don't recall that particular quote. I'd like to remember the context of it. But I've been out front here on the baby bonds, very much out front on baby bonds here, talking about it, and also on looking at the kicker, and I'm pleased to do so.
Okay. All right. Last question. I'm going to let Aaron ask it because he does it with flourish.
Let's say someone's making a movie of your life. It would have a lot of numbers in it.
Yes, I am a numbers geek.
But let's say they're making an action-packed, math-heavy motion picture of
Like,
your life. Like A Beautiful Mind.
There we go.
At any rate, who would play you in this biopic?
Jeff Goldblum.
Nice choice.
He's tall.
I got the same initials. What a fascinating question. It is a fun one. Who would play me?
I'll buy you some time. I would love to be played by Ed Norton. I don't think I'm smart enough to be played by Ed Norton, but I love Ed Norton.
Anne Hathaway, probably.
Fun choice.
Nice.
Thank you so much.
We have to write those. We have them on
Thank you.
recording. Oh, we need your ages too.